A tremor of absolute shock ran through the old man's impeccably tailored suit, freezing the sneer on his face. It wasn't the sound of the car crash outside, but the tiny, breathless voice from the shadows of the crowded farmer's market that cut through his carefully constructed world. "Daddy, look! A real, shiny dollar." His estranged son, Lucas Sterling, looked up, a ghost of a smile on his lips as his eyes locked onto a figure Harold Sterling hadn't seen in 6 agonizing years. "Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. I have missed you all. Missed all the experiences we've had together. It's been a rough ride as we're currently battling some technical issues, but trust me, we're getting everything back and running. So stick around. I need your support on YouTube now more than ever. Thank you specially for sticking around to this very moment. Now let's begin." The words, sharp as shards of ice, had exploded from Harold Sterling's mouth, instantly drawing the temperature in the magnificent mahogany-paneled office below freezing. "You're nothing but a disgrace. I will never allow my grandson to come from some peasant woman." The air inside the entire Sterling Manor mansion seemed to halt, every particle of dust suspended in the aftermath of the financial titan's roar. Harold Sterling, a man whose word moved markets and whose portfolio eclipsed the GDP of small nations, owned companies, luxury cars, and countless employees. He was a force of nature in a 3-piece suit, yet he had, in his ruthless ascent, lost the most precious thing of all, humility. Now, standing before him, was the very challenge to his carefully maintained illusion of control. His only son. Harold had just discovered that Lucas, his heir, the young man whose future he had meticulously planned from birth, Ivy League, investment banking, an advantageous marriage to the daughter of a rival CEO, had utterly derailed that path. Lucas had fallen irrevocably in love with a farm girl named Amy, a young woman whose hands smelled of fresh soil and lavender, not expensive perfume. The final, unforgivable blow was the news that Amy was carrying twins. "You're only 22, Lucas. 22. Marriage. Ridiculous. She's not worthy of you, not of the Sterling name." Harold spat out the last words as if they were poison on his tongue. He began to pace back and forth across the Persian rug, the sound of his Italian leather shoes against the thick wool a frantic metronome to his mounting fury. His fists clenched and unclenched, his right hand occasionally pounding the solid oak desk again and again, the rhythmic thud a desperate effort to anchor himself in a reality that was rapidly dissolving. Lucas, however, did not flinch. He remained standing with his back against the tall, arched window that overlooked the manicured gardens, the setting sun casting him in a calm, unwavering silhouette. His posture was relaxed, yet unshakably firm, a quiet defiance that infuriated Harold more than any shouting match ever could. Lucas possessed his father's height and striking looks, but where Harold's eyes held calculating coldness, Lucas's were warm, filled with an emotional depth his father had long since discarded as weakness. "Father, I've made my decision. I am marrying Amy, and she is having our children," Lucas stated, his voice level, carrying the finality of an official decree. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The simple truth of his commitment was a far more powerful weapon than his father's volatile rage. The room fell into a suffocating silence. The expensive grandfather clock in the hall seemed to tick louder, mocking the stillness. Harold stopped pacing and stared at his son, truly stared as if seeing him clearly for the first time, not as an extension of his own empire, but as an independent man capable of devastating insurrection. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, before Harold finally spoke, his voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper that was infinitely more terrifying than his earlier shouts. "Then you give her some money, a substantial amount, enough to set her up for life, enough to make her disappear. She's only after your inheritance, Lucas." "All women like that are," Harold hissed, the familiar cynicism coating his words like venom. He believed it, too. He had built his empire by assuming the worst in everyone, and he wasn't about to make an exception for a girl who worked the land for a living. "She's carrying your grandchildren, father," Lucas countered, his voice low but cutting through the cynicism. "She wouldn't take your money. She doesn't know I have it. She only sees me, a student, and a man who loves her. She doesn't want a single penny of the Sterling fortune. She wants a family." Harold scoffed, a dry, dismissive sound. "Innocence is a convenient mask, son. I saw her type when I was a struggling young man. They latch onto a successful family like a parasite. And I will not have my lineage tarnished by a woman who grew up in dirt. He italicized the word dirt, with a palpable disgust that was deeply insulting. Give her the money, Lucas. End this before it ruins everything. I'll pay for the problem to go away. Lucas took a slow, deep breath, the movement barely noticeable, but the resulting expression on his face was one of profound sadness, not anger. He knew this was the moment of no return. He was 22, yes, but he felt older, of his father, down by the history of his family and the crushing, loved the ambition and the drive. But he couldn't stand the cold, materialistic shell Harold had become. He would not sacrifice the pure, unconditional love he shared with Amy, a love that had finally made him feel like a whole human being, for a mere fortune. I won't do it, Father. I won't pay her off. I won't abandon her. And I won't abandon my children, Lucas declared, pushing himself off the wall and taking a single step forward, establishing his position. You can't buy her off, and you can't buy me off. I am marrying her next month. The full explosive power of Harold Sterling's rage was finally unleashed. He strode to his son, his face purple with fury, his eyes blazing with a horrifying combination of betrayal and absolute power. If you walk out that door for her, Lucas, you walk out of the Sterling empire. You will have no access to the trust funds, no position in the company, no credit cards, no inheritance. You will be cut off, utterly and completely. I will disown you. You will be poorer than that girl you claim to love. You will be nothing. The threat was real. Lucas knew it. His father was a man of his word, especially when that word was designed to inflict pain. Lucas swallowed hard, the weight of a multi-billion-dollar empire resting on his decision. He thought of Amy's easy laughter, the way the sun caught the curls of her dark hair, the fierce protective instinct he felt for the new life stirring inside her. He thought of a life free of the suffocating opulence and emotional poverty of Sterling Manor. I understand, Lucas said simply, the two words a definitive closing of one chapter and the terrifying, exhilarating opening of another. If I have to choose between your money and my family, I choose my family. Amy and our twins are my future, Father. Not the Sterling fortune. Harold recoiled as if physically struck, his breath catching in his throat. This wasn't the spoiled heir he thought he knew. This was a man he didn't recognize, a man who had chosen love over legacy. Then go. Get out. Don't you dare come back to this house until you have the decency to leave that wretched girl and her bastards behind. Harold roared, pointing a shaking finger toward the door. You are no longer a Sterling. You are dead to me. Lucas nodded, a tear tracing a path down his cheek, not of regret for his choice, but of sorrow for the father he was losing. He turned, walked toward the door, and without a backward glance, he stepped out of the office, out of the mansion, and out of the world he had always known. He took his car, a modest sedan he'd bought with summer job money, leaving the high-end sports cars in the garage, a final, silent statement of his independence. Harold stood alone, breathing heavily, the silence of the large office echoing his sudden, profound isolation. He had won the argument, asserting his power, but the victory felt utterly hollow. He had just disowned his only son, trading flesh and blood for the illusion of control. He sat heavily in his leather chair, the glow of the city lights a distant, cold comfort. The story of Lucas and Amy began with this shattering expulsion, and it was a story of two young people facing the sheer, brutal reality of starting from nothing, armed with only their love and the responsibility of two lives depending on them. They were alone, facing the world that Harold Sterling dominated, determined to prove that a life built on love was worth infinitely more than a life bought by money. Lucas drove away, watching the imposing silhouette of the Sterling Manor fade in his rearview mirror, the silence inside the car now a profound, heavy anticipation. He was free, but freedom had never been so terrifyingly expensive. The next time he saw his father would be years from now, and it would be under circumstances neither of them could possibly imagine on this dark, pivotal night. He gripped the steering wheel, one hand trembling slightly, the other resting protectively on the empty passenger seat, a silent vow to the woman and children he was driving toward. The small rented pickup truck Lucas drove rattled and groaned over the last stretch of rough, unpaved road, a stark contrast to the silent, climate-controlled comfort of the luxury sedans he had grown up expecting. This wasn't the manicured landscape of Greenwich, Connecticut. This was the rugged, sun-drenched expanse of rural Tennessee, where the air was thick with the scent of hay, pine, and honest labor. Lucas finally pulled the truck up to a modest two-story farmhouse, painted a faded blue, nestled amongst fields ready for the late summer harvest. This was Amy's world, the world Harold Sterling had dismissed as dirt, and it was now Lucas's sanctuary, and his challenge. As he killed the engine, the door swung open and Amy emerged. She was everything Harold had scorned and everything Lucas now cherished. Amy wasn't delicate. She was robust, with the kind of grounded strength that comes from a life connected to the rhythm of the seasons. Her skin, a beautiful deep cocoa, caught the last rays of the evening sun, and her rich dark hair was usually pulled back in a practical braid, though tonight a few loose tendrils framed a face alight with worry and immediate, unadulterated relief. Her eyes, large and expressive, swept over Lucas, noting the deep, weary lines around his mouth, but settling on the relief of his presence. She was already showing, her pregnancy with twins, a miraculous double blessing, giving her a gentle, undeniable fullness. "Lucas, you're late." "I've been pacing the porch for an hour," she chided softly, walking quickly toward him, not stopping until she was close enough to slip her arms around his waist. Her warmth, the earthy scent of her clothes, was a balm to his soul, a powerful antidote to the freezing cold of his father's office. Lucas held her tightly, inhaling deeply, letting the tension bleed out of his shoulders. "I'm sorry, love. It was a difficult conversation. Longer than I expected," he admitted, stepping back to cup her face in his hands. He deliberately omitted the brutal details of his disownment, the shouting, the threats, and the final crushing condemnation. He wanted to protect her from Harold's toxicity, at least for a few more peaceful hours. Amy immediately sensed the gravity of the unspoken words. She knew Lucas hadn't told his father about the twins yet, only the pregnancy, but she also knew the depths of Harold Sterling's arrogance. Did he give you a hard time?" she asked, her gaze steady. Lucas tried to smile, but it felt thin and strained. "He gave me a choice, Amy. The Sterling name and fortune, or you and our children." He looked directly into her eyes, making sure she understood the simple, profound truth of what came next. "I chose you. I walked away from it all, Amy. Everything. The trust funds, the company position, the house. I have about $300 in my bank account, the clothes on my back, and this old truck. We start fresh. From nothing." Amy didn't look shocked or distressed. Her expression shifted into one of fierce, protective pride. Her hands, calloused and strong, covered his own. "Oh, Lucas. You gave up everything," she whispered, but the tone was not regretful. It was reverent. "You didn't have to do that. You could have figured out a way to keep your family and still have some of your inheritance." Lucas shook his head firmly. "No. I told you," he demanded, "I pay you off. He called you unworthy, a disgrace, a gold digger. He said the twins were bastards. I couldn't stay there, Amy. That isn't a life. It's a prison of judgment and money. I want a life with you, built on honesty and hard work, not on his contempt." He gently touched her belly. "We will build a good life for them. We will show him what worth truly means." Amy's eyes welled up, but she didn't let the tears fall. She was not a woman who crumbled easily. "Then we'll do it, Lucas. We'll show him. Welcome home, Mr. Sterling. The rent here is $0, the food is seasonal, and the boss is waiting for you with a hug." She pulled him inside the warm, cluttered kitchen, instantly grounding him in her reality. The kitchen was dominated by a large wooden table where a bowl of steaming stew sat, surrounded by jars of preserved peaches and freshly baked cornbread. The next morning, Lucas, still adjusting to the idea that he was now financially independent, or rather dependent entirely on his own raw labor, woke early to the sound of roosters and the rich aroma of coffee and bacon. He found Amy already dressed in faded jeans and a comfortable worn t-shirt, pulling on heavy leather work gloves. "Morning, sleeping beauty. We've got a long day. The last of the summer squash needs to come in before the midday heat hits, and then we have to haul water for the chickens," she informed him cheerfully. Lucas blinked, still processing the sheer volume of unfamiliar tasks. In his past life, his morning routine involved a gym session, an espresso, and reading the financial reports on a tablet. He smiled, a genuine, unforced smile this time. Squash and chickens. Lead the way, boss. The contrast between Lucas's past and present was a physical shock. His hands, accustomed to handling tailored suits and fountain pens, quickly blistered under the friction of the hoe and the weight of the water buckets. He sweated more in those first 2 hours than he had in an entire summer at the yacht club. Amy, witnessing his struggle, showed infinite patience, correcting his grip, teaching him how to move to conserve energy, and laughing gently when he nearly stepped in a pile of cow manure. "You're doing well for a debutante," she teased, wiping a smudge of dirt from his cheek. "I may never wear a tailored suit again, but I've never been prouder of the dirt on my hands," he retorted, leaning in to kiss her forehead, tasting the salt of sweat and the subtle sweetness of her skin. He was learning more than farming. He was learning resilience, self-reliance, and the value of a dollar earned through honest toil. They spent the next month in a whirlwind of activity, preparing for the marriage and the twins' arrival. Lucas sold the last few expensive, unnecessary items he had, a high-end watch, some designer luggage, to secure their rent payment for the next quarter. Amy, who was an independent farmer, insisted they would not accept any charity, but that Lucas must be an equal partner in the financial struggle. They worked together on her tiny farm stand, selling produce, and Lucas, using his privileged education, applied his business acumen to increase their yield and diversify their sales to a few local restaurants. He may have been a disgraced financial titan's son, but he was still exceptionally intelligent. He used his quantitative skills to maximize their crop rotation and manage inventory, turning a modest profit into a sustainable, albeit tiny, income. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of weeding and harvesting, they sat on the porch swing, exhausted but content. Lucas held Amy close, stroking her rounded stomach. "I still can't believe it's twins," he murmured. "It feels like a gift, a promise." "It's a double challenge, Mr. Sterling. We'll need a lot of diapers and a lot of sleep." Amy laughed softly, resting her head against his shoulder. "But we'll manage. I know we will. What we have is stronger than any money his father could offer." Lucas nodded, but his mind briefly flashed back to the sheer, terrifying power of Harold Sterling. He knew his father wouldn't simply accept this defeat. Harold Sterling never lost. He retaliated. Lucas was certain Harold was tracking him, watching, waiting for him to fail, to crawl back, defeated and begging for mercy. The knowledge kept a steady hum of anxiety beneath the surface of his happiness. A few days later, the quiet peace was shattered. A slick black corporate sedan, a car that looked wildly out of place amongst the farm trucks, pulled up to the dirt road entrance, and a well-dressed man in a suit, a lawyer Lucas immediately recognized as Mr. Harrison, Harold's senior counsel, approached the farmhouse. Mr. Harrison, a man Lucas had known since childhood, stood stiffly, holding a thick manila envelope. "Mr. Sterling, I have been instructed by your father to deliver this document," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. Lucas stepped forward, his heart sinking. He knew it wasn't a peace offering. Amy stood silently beside him, her expression hardening. "Is this the final disownment?" Lucas asked, his voice steady. "It is a legal severing of all financial and familial ties, retroactive from the moment you left Sterling Manor. Furthermore, there is an official demand," Mr. Harrison stated, consulting a note. "A demand that you legally prohibit the woman Amy from using the Sterling name, now or at any point in the future, should you marry." The demand was petty, vindictive, and deeply personal. It was a final slap in the face, a clear message that Harold wanted every trace of Lucas's choice eradicated. Amy's hand gripped Lucas's arm fiercely, restraining him. Lucas took the envelope, the paper feeling heavy, almost toxic. "Tell my father that I have no intention of dragging the Sterling name into the beautiful, honest life I am building here. I choose to be Lucas, not Sterling." He paused, looking directly at the lawyer. "And tell him that I will never crawl back, no matter how hard he tries to starve us out. My family is worth more than his entire empire." Mr. Harrison, visibly uncomfortable witnessing the raw emotion and defiance, simply nodded, adjusted his tie, and retreated to the car. As the black sedan sped away, kicking up dust, Amy finally let out a long, shaky breath. That man is a monster, Lucas," Amy murmured, clutching the collar of his shirt. "He is," Lucas agreed, tearing the envelope in half without opening it. "But we are stronger. We have everything we need right here." He just led her toward the porch. They walked inside, Lucas throwing the torn papers into the wood-burning stove where they quickly turned to ash, the ash of his past, making room for the fire of their new life. They set the date for a small private wedding in 2 weeks, to be held right there on the farm under the giant oak tree. They wanted the twins to be born into a legitimately united family, bound not by a legal contract, but by a vow made on the very soil that was now sustaining them. As they planned the simple ceremony, inviting only Amy's closest relatives and a few friendly neighbors, Lucas reflected on the irony. He, the heir to billions, was finding more happiness and security in the prospect of farming squash and raising chickens than he ever had behind the gilded gates of his father's mansion. This exile was not a punishment. It was a baptism into true humanity. Yet, he knew the greatest test of their resolve was yet to come. They had rejected the money, but could they survive when the sheer, overwhelming power of Harold Sterling turned from passive disdain to active, calculated sabotage? He knew his father. The disownment was just the opening salvo. 2 weeks later, the air under the great sprawling oak tree on Amy's property was soft and golden, thick with the scent of late-blooming jasmine and freshly cut grass. The meager 20 people gathered were an ocean away from the hundreds who would have attended a Sterling wedding. A grand, calculated affair designed to merge 2 financial dynasties. This was different. This was intimacy, stripped bare of pretense. Amy, radiant in a simple borrowed ivory dress that gently draped over her twin-bearing frame, walked toward Lucas, holding a bouquet of wildflowers picked from her own fields. Lucas, standing taller and straighter than ever in a crisp white shirt and dark trousers, watched her approach, his heart pounding a rhythm of pure, unadulterated joy. He saw not a poor farm girl, but his entire future, strong, beautiful, and utterly true. As the sun began its descent, casting long, peaceful shadows, they exchanged vows that were simple, profound, and utterly unlike the legalistic contracts Harold had always valued. There were no prenuptial agreements, no discussions of inheritance, only promises of fidelity, perseverance, and unconditional love. They were married by a local justice of the peace, a kind, elderly woman who spoke about the resilience of love rooted in hard work. When Lucas placed a simple hand-engraved silver band on Amy's finger, the act felt heavier and more valuable than any diamond he could have afforded. They were now Mr. and Mrs. Lucas, the Sterling name by his own choice, left behind in the ash heap of his past. The celebration that followed was a feast of local, simple foods, barbecued chicken, fresh farm vegetables, and a modest, home-baked cake. Laughter was the currency of the evening, and Lucas, surrounded by the genuine warmth of Amy's family and neighbors, felt a sense of belonging he had never experienced in the cavernous, silent halls of Sterling Manor. Amy's aunt, a wise, formidable woman named Clara, pulled Lucas aside as he cleared plates. "You've got good hands, Lucas," Clara observed, giving his forearm a gentle, approving squeeze. "Not soft. You've got the right mind, too." Amy needed a partner, not a prince. "But listen to me now, child. That daddy of yours? Harold Sterling is like a storm cloud that follows you even when the sun is shining here. He won't let this stand. He will test you and he will test her. You have to be ready to protect her from the shadows he casts." Lucas met her gaze, his own filled with grim determination. "I know, Clara. I am ready. He can take the money, but he can't take our spirit. He'll try to take the foundation, honey. Watch your back and watch the farm's ledger," she warned, her voice dropping to a low, serious register before she turned back to the party, leaving Lucas with a heightened sense of vigilance. Clara's premonition proved tragically accurate. The euphoria of the wedding barely lasted a week before the first tremors of Harold's calculated campaign began to shake their fragile foundation. Lucas and Amy had finally secured a much-needed small-scale contract to supply specialized organic herbs to a high-end restaurant group in Nashville, a major breakthrough that would significantly stabilize their income for the coming months. Lucas had used his old contacts and impressive presentation skills to secure the deal, a small triumph he was immensely proud of. 3 days after the contract was signed, the restaurant group called. The executive chef, who had been effusive in his praise, now sounded strained and apologetic. "I am so terribly sorry, Lucas, but we have to terminate the agreement immediately. It's nothing personal, your produce is excellent truly. But, well, let's just say a very influential party made it economically impossible for us to proceed. They essentially bought out all of our future ingredient needs from another, larger supplier. We'd lose our shirt if we fought it." Lucas's blood ran cold. He knew instinctively who the very influential party was. Harold wasn't just disowning him. He was using his vast corporate network to systematically choke off every avenue of independent income, ensuring that Lucas and Amy's farm venture would fail. It was an economic siege. He called 2 other potential clients, smaller local businesses, only to receive similar vague, regretful messages. Harold was operating with surgical precision, leveraging his financial weight to crush Lucas's burgeoning business relationships before they could even take root. The financial pressure immediately mounted. The seed supplier demanded their overdue payment, which Lucas had planned to cover with the Nashville contract money. Without it, he couldn't afford the winter crops that would see them through the slower months. Amy, who had initially been determined and resilient, began to show the strain, both physical and emotional. The stress of the loss, coupled with the advanced stage of her twin pregnancy, made every day an exhausting battle. She became withdrawn, often sitting silently at the kitchen table, running worried fingers over the rough painted wood. One evening, Lucas found her crying silently over the small stack of unpaid bills. He rushed to her side, pulling her into his arms. "Amy, look at me. It's okay. We'll figure it out. We always do," he whispered into her hair. She looked up at him, her eyes red and puffy. "No, Lucas, we won't this time. It's not just bad luck. It's him, isn't it? Your father. He's closing in, Lucas. He's trying to starve us out. He wants you to crawl back, and he wants me to be the reason you do it. He wants to prove I'm a liability." Her voice cracked with genuine fear and pain. "We can't afford the doctor's final prenatal visits, Lucas. We can barely afford food that isn't grown in our own dirt. What if something goes wrong with the babies? What if we lose the farm? I brought you here, Lucas, and now I'm the reason you're losing everything." Her despair hit him harder than any threat from his father. Harold wasn't just attacking their livelihood. He was attacking Amy's self-worth and their children's safety. Lucas pushed back, his voice thick with protective fury. "Listen to me. You are not the reason. You are the only good thing that has ever happened to me, Amy. This isn't your fault. This is his toxic addiction to control. He's a scared old man hiding behind billions of dollars. We chose this, remember? The simple life, the honest life. We will not let him break us." That night, Lucas stayed up late, poring over the farm's meager finances. He realized that the simple farming life he had romanticized was utterly vulnerable to the predatory tactics of a corporate shark like Harold. He needed a defense, a buffer, a way to generate income that couldn't be easily traced or leveraged by his father's vast empire. He needed to use the one asset Harold couldn't take away, his intellect and education. He decided to go back to his roots, but on his own terms. Using a borrowed older laptop, Lucas set up a profile on several freelance platforms. He couldn't advertise his identity, as Harold's surveillance was likely constant, so he created a pseudonym, A. Jones, financial analyst. He began offering consulting services, data modeling, small business strategy, and complex financial analysis. All work he was uniquely qualified for, having absorbed the knowledge of his father's world for 2 decades. The fees were small, paid directly through anonymous online platforms, but they were liquid, untraceable, and essential. It was grueling work. Lucas would spend his days toiling in the fields, his muscles aching and his hands raw, only to come inside, clean up, and spend his nights hunched over the glowing screen, transforming back into the cold, sharp analyst he had been trained to be. He was running a dangerous double life. Farmer by day, ghost financial consultant by night, using the dark arts of his father's world to fund the light, honest life Amy had given him. The emotional toll was immense. He was constantly tired, haunted by the fear of detection and the immense responsibility of his growing family. Amy noticed the late nights, the quiet tapping of keys, the shadows under his eyes. She didn't press him, sensing that this was a battle he needed to fight alone to protect them. She focused her energy on conserving their resources, extending their small food supply, and preparing for the baby's imminent arrival. One rainy afternoon, as Lucas returned from delivering a complex analysis report to a client in Germany, he received an anonymous email. It contained a single attachment, a grainy, secretly taken photograph of Amy standing in their yard, a tired but loving smile on her face. The subject line read only, "A choice must be made, son. The clock is ticking." The threat was clear and terrifyingly real. Harold wasn't just playing economic warfare. He was employing surveillance, demonstrating that he knew exactly where they were and that their children were still on the way. The photo was a chilling invasion of their privacy, a violation that turned Lucas's weariness into white-hot rage. His father was crossing a line, turning from a harsh parent into a calculated enemy. Lucas looked at the image, then out the window at Amy, who was now carefully tending to her small potted herb garden. He knew then that simple hard work wouldn't be enough. To protect his family, he needed to become as shrewd and ruthless as the ghost of the sterling empire that relentlessly pursued them. He had to play Harold's game, but with a purpose his father could never understand. Love. The anonymous photograph and the chilling threat injected a desperate urgency into Lucas's already frantic existence. He doubled down on his nocturnal consulting work, fueled by coffee and the sheer terror of failure. He was no longer just earning money. He was building a protective shield of liquidity. Amy, meanwhile, was increasingly consumed by the impending births. Her due date was approaching rapidly, and the sheer physical burden of carrying twins, coupled with the persistent anxiety of their precarious financial situation, was taking a severe toll. They were isolated, financially besieged, and perpetually exhausted. One blustery evening, just 2 weeks after receiving the ominous photograph, the siege broke in the most profound way possible, with the onset of labor. Lucas was working on a complex valuation model for a client in Singapore, the blue light of the screen illuminating the tense lines of his face, when he heard a sharp, undeniable cry from the bedroom. He dropped the laptop and sprinted. Amy was sitting up, clutching her swollen belly, her face slick with sweat, a mixture of fear and pain etched across her features. "Lucas, I think it's time. They're coming. I need to go now," she gasped, her voice tight with effort. Panic, cold and visceral, momentarily seized Lucas. The nearest reputable hospital was an hour away. The drive would be agonizing. He forced himself to breathe, recalling the emergency preparation steps they had drilled. He was still Lucas Sterling, the man of action, even if he was now wearing jeans and a work shirt, not a suit. He scooped Amy up gently, his arms surprisingly strong from months of farm labor, and carried her to the truck. The old pickup, which usually rattled cheerfully along the dirt roads, seemed to protest every bump and turn as Lucas drove with a frantic, focused intensity he hadn't known he possessed. Every mile was an internal battle against the fear that he was driving too fast, or not fast enough. "Lucas, breathe. You're scaring me more than the pain," Amy managed to say between contractions, her voice wavering. She reached out and placed her hand on his forearm, grounding him. I know, love. Just hold on. We're almost there. Just hold on for me," he repeated, his own voice sounding raw and tight. They arrived at the small regional hospital, not the exclusive private maternity ward in Manhattan Harold had reserved in his mind for his grandchildren, just in time. The next several hours were a blur of fluorescent lights, frantic nurses, and the deep guttural sounds of Amy's labor. Lucas stayed by her side the entire time, ignoring the exhaustion that was bone deep, holding her hand so tightly his knuckles were white, offering quiet encouragements and wiping her brow. He was a pillar of unwavering presence, pouring all his energy and love into supporting the woman who was fighting the most profound battle of their shared life. Finally, after what felt like an eternity suspended between pain and hope, the cries came. First one, a tiny, outraged squeal, then a second, a powerful, robust protest. Elijah, the firstborn, and Naomi, his sister. A boy and a girl. They were healthy, whole, and perfectly beautiful, with Amy's dark, shining eyes and Lucas's finely shaped hands and feet. When the nurse gently placed the two tiny, bundled lives into Lucas's arms, the weight of them felt heavier than any corporate merger, more valuable than any empire. In that moment, holding his children, smelling the soft new baby scent, Lucas understood the true meaning of wealth. This was his legacy. His defiance against Harold's materialistic cruelty had resulted in this profound, double miracle. He wept openly, tears of relief, exhaustion, and limitless love streaming down his face. Amy, utterly drained but glowing with maternal joy, reached out a tired hand and stroked his cheek. "We did it, Lucas. We did it all by ourselves," she whispered, her voice husky. The euphoria of the birth, however, was immediately tempered by reality. The hospital bills, even for a modest regional facility, were crippling. They had insurance, but the deductible and copay for a twin delivery, especially one with minor complications, were astronomical. Easily swallowing the emergency funds Lucas had painstakingly earned through his covert consulting. They used up the last of their liquid capital just to secure the baby's discharge. Back on the farm, the stress intensified. Lucas worked ferociously, farming by day, analyzing complex spreadsheets by night, trying to bridge the financial gap that was widening daily. He was running on fumes, constantly worried about the babies, Amy's recovery, and the lurking threat of his father. 3 weeks after the birth, the final, most aggressive blow landed. Lucas was outside trying to fix a leak in the irrigation system, when a familiar, sleek black vehicle approached, this time not the lawyer's sedan, but a high-end, unmarked SUV. Out stepped not a lawyer, but Richard Sterling, Lucas's own uncle, Harold's younger, quieter brother, a man who had always remained on the periphery of the family business. Richard was a man Lucas genuinely respected. Kind, empathetic, and always slightly uncomfortable with the family's excess. Richard approached slowly, his face etched with genuine sorrow. He didn't offer a corporate handshake. He simply rested a hand on Lucas's shoulder. "Lucas, it pains me to be here, son." "Truly," Richard said, his voice low and regretful. "Uncle Richard, why are you here? Did Father send you to deliver the final blow?" Lucas asked, his tone flat, exhausted and wary. Richard sighed and pulled a folded legal document from his inner pocket. "This is different, Lucas. This is the last offer. The absolute final ultimatum. Harold is furious. More furious than I've ever seen him. The fact that you survived this long, that you had the children. It's a direct challenge to his authority." He handed Lucas the document. It wasn't a disownment notice. It was a highly specific, legally drawn-up custody and financial agreement. Lucas unfolded it, his eyes scanning the terrifying terms. The document offered a staggering sum, a $50 million immediate, untraceable deposit into an offshore account, and the reinstatement of his full access to the Sterling Trust. The condition was monstrous. Lucas must return to New York immediately, formally take his place as the heir, and end his marriage to Amy, either by divorce or by mutual separation and agreement. Furthermore, the ultimatum demanded that Amy sign a document relinquishing all parental rights to Elijah and Naomi, who would be legally adopted by Lucas and raised in New York by a team of high-end nannies and tutors, ensuring they received the proper Sterling upbringing, free from the unstable, low-class influence of their mother. Amy would receive a separate, generous, lifetime annuity in exchange for her silence and permanent disappearance from the children's lives. The document stated that if Lucas refused, Harold would use every legal, financial, and personal weapon at his disposal to systematically bankrupt them, seize their assets, and initiate a vicious, protracted custody battle that would destroy Amy's reputation and ensure Lucas lost the twins anyway. The subtext was clear: if Harold couldn't control Lucas, he would control the grandchildren. Lucas's hands shook so violently the paper rattled. The sheer calculated cruelty of the offer, to use the very children he loved as a weapon against their mother, made him physically sick. Harold wasn't just disowning him. He was demanding the annihilation of his family unit. "He wants me to choose wealth over the mother of my children, and my children over the woman who gave them life?" Lucas spat out, the words laced with pure venom. "He wants his legacy, Lucas. He sees them as sterling assets, not as human beings," Richard admitted miserably. "He gave me 24 hours to deliver your answer. If you refuse, He's starting the litigation process tomorrow morning. He's already pulled strings with a high-profile family court judge. He's capable of anything. Richard looked at his nephew, his eyes pleading. Lucas, he will destroy you both. He will take the children. You have to consider this. Think of the twins. $50 million could protect them forever. Lucas crumpled the document in his fist, his rage finally boiling over. He looked toward the house, where he could hear Amy's soft humming as she tended to the babies. He thought of her strength, her honesty, and the sacrifices she had made. He thought of his two beautiful, innocent children sleeping peacefully inside. He turned back to Richard, his posture rigid. Tell him he can take his $50 million and choke on it, Uncle Richard. Tell him that a man who trades love for money isn't worthy of being called a father or a grandfather. I chose my family. I chose Amy, and I chose my children, and I will burn the world down before I let him touch a single hair on their heads. The answer is no. Richard looked heartbroken but strangely proud. He nodded slowly, knowing he couldn't change Lucas's mind. I understand. Be careful, son. He plays for keeps. Richard got back into the SUV, the roar of the powerful engine quickly fading into the quiet of the Tennessee farmland, leaving Lucas standing alone, holding the crumpled evidence of his father's final desperate attempt to reclaim control. Lucas walked back inside, the weight of the war now undeniable. He kissed Amy, who smiled softly, unaware of the immense threat they had just dodged. He looked at Elijah and Naomi, their tiny chests rising and falling in perfect unison. He knew he had to stop playing defense. To save his family, he had to go on the offense. He had to hit Harold Sterling where he lived. His corporate empire. Lucas knew everything about his father's business. The weak points, the over-leveraged assets, the skeleton keys to the kingdom. He would use the dark knowledge Harold had forced upon him to destroy the very foundation of the Sterling name, forcing his father to choose between his empire and his malice. Lucas's refusal of the ultimatum was not merely an act of defiance. It was a declaration of war. He knew that Harold Sterling, having exhausted the polite channels of coercion, would now unleash the full destructive force of his corporate power through the courts. To fight a multi-billionaire in a custody battle was impossible for a cash-strapped farmer. The only way to save his family was to destabilize the source of Harold's malice, the Sterling Empire itself. Lucas had to create a distraction so catastrophic, a threat so immediate, that his father would be forced to pull back from the personal war to save his financial life. He retreated to his small, makeshift office, a rickety desk tucked into the corner of the pantry, the only space quiet enough at night to work uninterrupted by the gentle cries of Elijah and Naomi. The contrast was jarring. By day, he changed diapers and hauled feed. By night, he resurrected the ruthless, calculating mind of a world-class financial analyst. He became Joan, a corporate ghost working in the shadows of the internet, leveraging every piece of insider knowledge he had unintentionally absorbed growing up. Lucas knew the Sterling Empire, Sterling Global Investments, SGI, intimately. He knew it wasn't the invincible monolith the media portrayed. Harold had a weakness. An insatiable, aggressive hunger for growth that often led to over-leveraging. Specifically, he focused on SGI's recent colossal acquisition of a tech conglomerate, Ethelred Robotics. Harold had used a significant complex debt instrument, a type of highly volatile bond, to finance the deal, believing the market would mask the risk. Lucas knew that if that specific bond market were rattled, the sheer volume of SGI's leverage could trigger a chain reaction, causing a liquidity crisis. His strategy was simple in concept, terrifying in execution. Expose the fragility of Ethelred's valuation and the hidden liabilities Harold had buried deep within the acquisition structure. For the next several weeks, Lucas lived a life split in two, the physical exhaustion of manual labor competing with the mental fatigue of high-stakes corporate espionage. He'd spend hours reviewing digitized versions of internal SGI documents he had access to from his student internship days, reports on Ethelred's weak intellectual property protections and overly optimistic revenue projections. He cross-referenced this with public data, news reports, and insider forums, building a devastatingly accurate, anonymous white paper that exposed the Ethelred acquisition as a debt-fueled mirage. The tension at home was immense. Amy, bless her resilience, noticed the change. Lucas was present but distracted, his focus always half-turned inward. She often found him in the pantry at 3 a.m., surrounded by empty coffee mugs and the faint glow of his screen, his expression grim. One night, finding him staring blankly at a complex spreadsheet, she came to him, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. "Lucas, what is happening? You look like you haven't slept since the twins were born. Is it the farm? Is it more debt?" Lucas sighed, rubbing the stubble on his chin. He knew he couldn't tell her the full extent of his plan. The danger was too great, and the details too complex to add to her burden. But he couldn't keep the truth entirely hidden either. "It's Harold, Amy. He's not just threatening us. He's preparing to file a massive lawsuit to seize the twins, claiming we are unfit parents. He's using his immense power to crush us legally," Lucas admitted, finally dropping his guard. "The only way to stop him from taking Elijah and Naomi is to make him stop caring about the fight. I'm giving him a much bigger problem." He gestured vaguely at the laptop. "I'm using his own weapons against him. I'm exposing a massive flaw in his biggest recent investment. I'm going to hit him so hard financially that he won't have the time or the focus to hunt us down. It's risky, but it's the only option left. It's him or us, Amy. And I will choose us every single time." Amy looked from the complex equations on the screen to her husband's weary, determined face. She didn't understand the financial jargon, but she understood the loyalty and the sacrifice. She was terrified, but she trusted him absolutely. "Then do it, Lucas. But don't let that world consume you again. You are doing this for love, not for profit. Remember that distinction." "I won't forget," he promised. "I'm Lucas, the farmer, using the ghost of the sterling heir to protect his family." Finally, the document was ready. Under the pseudonym, the Cassandra Group, Lucas disseminated the detailed analysis to a carefully selected list of financial journalists, hedge fund managers, and regulatory analysts who he knew had a long-standing, skeptical eye on SGI. The report didn't accuse Harold of illegal activity, but it used undeniable data to prove that Ethelred was vastly overvalued, that SGI's financing was precariously structured, and that the entire deal was a ticking time bomb waiting for a slight market downturn to detonate. The impact was immediate and devastating. Within 48 hours, the financial news cycle exploded. Reputable journals picked up the Cassandra Group's analysis. Analysts across Wall Street began frantically re-evaluating SGI's debt exposure. The Ethelred robotic stock, the very asset underpinning Harold's massive bond issue, plummeted by 15% in a single day. The sudden drop triggered margin calls and instantly put SGI's entire liquidity position under severe strain. Billions of dollars were suddenly at stake. At Sterling Manor, Harold Sterling was in a state of absolute chaos. His personal war room, usually a place of calm, clinical ruthlessness, was filled with shouting and frantic activity. The sudden, anonymous, and devastatingly accurate attack on SGI's foundation was far more damaging than any hostile takeover attempt. It was a precise, intellectual assassination of market confidence. Who is the Cassandra Group? Find them. Now. Harold roared into the phone, slamming his hand onto the desk, the same desk he had pounded the day he disowned Lucas. He immediately suspected a rival firm or a vengeful hedge fund, never once considering that the source of his misery could be the disgrace he had banished to a remote farm. The corporate ghost strike worked perfectly. Harold's focus immediately shifted from family court battles to corporate survival. The lawsuit preparation against Lucas and Amy halted instantly. Every lawyer, every analyst, every hour of Harold's time was now dedicated to preventing SGI from imploding under the massive hemorrhaging debt crisis. Lucas had achieved the impossible. He had bought his family time, breathing room, and safety, not with money, but with superior knowledge and sheer audacity. But the victory was short-lived. Lucas's anonymous work had solved the immediate threat, but it hadn't solved their long-term financial viability. Their bills were still overdue, and the farm needed significant investment to survive the winter. More dangerously, Harold was a brilliant, vicious fighter. He was losing billions, and when he finally traced the source of this devastating attack, or even just suspected his son, his retaliation would be biblical. Lucas looked at his sleeping children, their faces serene and innocent, and knew the reprieve was only temporary. He had won a battle of wits, but the final confrontation was looming, and it would demand more than anonymous corporate maneuvering. It would demand the two Sterlings face each other, not as father and son, but as combatants. He just needed one more piece of the puzzle to truly secure their future. The tremors of the Cassandra Group attack continued to rock the foundations of Sterling Global Investments. For the first time in his professional life, Harold Sterling was losing control of his narrative and, more importantly, his billions. The plunge in Ethelred's stock price was only the beginning. The exposure of SGI's over-leveraged position sent ripples of panic across his institutional investors. Harold was consumed, locking himself in his war room for days, demanding his security and legal teams find the mysterious financial saboteur. This is not a competitor, this is a surgical strike. Harold railed, pacing his office floor until the carpet seemed worn thin. They knew exactly where the weak points were. They knew the debt structure, the valuation flaws, information only privy to the highest levels of SGI. Find the leak. Find the source. The pressure on the Sterling legal team was immense. They chased ghost leads, investigated every rival firm, and scrutinized every high-level departure from SGI over the past decade. The anonymity of the attack, coupled with its devastating accuracy, made tracing Lucas impossible. Harold, blinded by his assumption that only a financial titan could orchestrate such a sophisticated attack, never once looked back at the nothing he had discarded. The son whose intimate knowledge of the empire was now its most existential threat. Meanwhile, on the farm, the quiet reprieve bought by the corporate chaos was a precious commodity. Lucas and Amy focused fiercely on their children. Elijah and Naomi were thriving, their presence a constant, joyful reminder of why Lucas was fighting this impossible war. The small amount of money Lucas had earned from his earlier consulting gigs, coupled with a slightly better-than-expected harvest, meant they could pay off the most pressing bills and buy essential supplies for the babies. Yet, the struggle was relentless. Lucas was perpetually exhausted. The lack of sleep from the double life, manual labor by day, intellectual warfare by night, was etched into his face. Amy, still recovering and simultaneously caring for twins, worried constantly. They loved their life, but the constant threat of collapse, both financial and legal, was a suffocating reality. One afternoon, Lucas was out fixing the fence line when Amy received an unexpected visitor. It was not a lawyer or a debt collector. It was Richard Sterling, Lucas's uncle, the man who had delivered the last ultimatum. He arrived alone, in a nondescript rental car, looking tired and anxious. Amy, wary but polite, stepped onto the porch. "Uncle Richard. Lucas isn't here right now." Richard held up his hands, placatingly. "Amy, please. I didn't come here to talk business or deliver threats. I came as Lucas's uncle, and frankly, as a very worried brother. Harold is going insane, losing billions trying to contain this anonymous attack. He's obsessed with the Cassandra Group. He's forgetting his own name." He paused, then looked straight at Amy. "I know Lucas refused the ultimatum, and frankly, I'm proud of him for it. But I also know what he's doing. I didn't trace the Cassandra Group through IP addresses, Amy. I traced it through the methodology, the sheer, intricate precision of the attack. Only one person outside of Harold's top confidants could execute that. Only Lucas." Amy's composure didn't falter, though a flicker of fear crossed her eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about, Richard. Lucas is a farmer. He hasn't touched a spreadsheet in months. He is the most financially brilliant person I know, Amy. Even more so than Harold, because Lucas has ethics. But listen, the point is not that he's winning. The point is that when Harold figures it out, and he won't just file a lawsuit. He will ruin Lucas utterly and completely. I need Lucas to know that he has to stop. The risk is too high." Amy stood firm. "He is protecting his children, Richard. He will not stop until they are safe. Please go." Richard nodded, defeated. He turned to leave, but then stopped, staring at the screen door which was slightly ajar. Amy realized her mistake too late. She had been soothing a crying Naomi just before Richard arrived, and the baby's swing was positioned perfectly to be seen through the screen door. Richard walked slowly, hesitantly, toward the porch rail, peering inside. What he saw was a tableau of simple, messy, beautiful family life. A pile of clean, folded laundry on the sofa, a half-eaten bowl of baby cereal on the counter, and in the background, gently rocking in a battery-powered swing, was one of the twins, Naomi. She was fussing softly, her tiny hands waving in the air, her face turned up toward the gentle light. Richard froze. He had seen photos of the twins that Harold's security had taken, but seeing the child in person, in the midst of a real, lived, loving chaos, was an entirely different experience. Naomi was undeniably a Sterling. She had the same high cheekbones and serious brow that ran through the male line, but her eyes, large, dark, and full of innocent wonder, were pure Amy. He watched the baby for a full, silent minute, the sounds of the farm, a distant tractor, the clucking of chickens, the only witnesses to this moment. Then, Richard reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He did not take a picture of the baby. Instead, he took a short, discreet video clip, not of Naomi's face, but of the environment. The worn, homemade quilt in the swing, the humble kitchen, the evidence of Amy's constant, loving labor, and the clear, undeniable signs that this was a home built on sacrifice, not extravagance. He captured the essence of the life Harold called disgraceful. He looked at Amy. His expression profoundly changed. "I didn't come to threaten you, Amy. I came to warn Lucas. But what I see here," he shook his head, a wave of weariness passing over him. "I see a family. A real one. I will not be a part of Harold's campaign anymore. Tell Lucas I am out. I will not tell Harold anything about the farm. But I need to show my brother this." He didn't elaborate. He simply turned, got into his rental car, and drove away. Amy watched him go, a shiver running down her spine. Had Richard just made things infinitely worse, or had he offered a strange, silent alliance? She didn't know, but she knew her only recourse was to tell Lucas everything. Later that night, after feeding the twins, Lucas listened intently to Amy's account of Richard's visit. The corporate attack had won them a battle, but Richard's personal discovery was the true pivot. Lucas understood his uncle. Richard was weary of Harold's toxicity. He had seen the truth, that Lucas was not simply wasting his life, but building a meaningful one. The next morning, thousands of miles away in Manhattan, Richard Sterling walked into Harold's penthouse office. Harold was on a conference call, his face haggard, shouting orders to his executive team regarding the SGI stock hemorrhage. Richard waited patiently until Harold slammed the phone down. "Richard, where the hell have you been? I need you to lead the internal investigation. We think a competitor is colluding with a former employee." Richard cut him off, his voice firm and quiet. "Harold, stop. You need to look at something." Harold scoffed. "If this isn't about SGI's liquidity, I don't care, Richard." Richard took out his phone and played the video clip. It was only 30 seconds long, a small, dark-skinned baby, Naomi, fussing gently in a swing, surrounded by humble, loving chaos. The audio captured Amy's gentle, off-camera humming, a simple tune of maternal comfort. Harold stared at the screen, the noise of the corporate panic in his head momentarily silenced. He saw his grandchild, a tiny, perfect life, nestled not in a silk bassinet in a penthouse, but in a used swing in a simple farmhouse. He saw the worn wood of the floor, the clean but mismatched curtains, the complete lack of opulence, and the overwhelming presence of care. "What is this, Richard?" Harold whispered, his voice dangerously soft, but utterly lacking its usual roar. "That, Harold, is your granddaughter, Naomi. And that is the life Lucas chose. The life you want to destroy. You're losing billions fighting a ghost who is smarter than you are, while this is what you're trying to annihilate." Richard's eyes held his brother's, demanding that he see beyond the dollar signs. "You disowned Lucas for love, and now you're risking your entire empire because you refuse to admit you were wrong. You need to look at this and decide what you truly value, Harold. Money or flesh and blood." The video played again, the sound of the soft humming and the baby's gentle cry filling the sterile office. It was the first true, undeniable visual evidence Harold had seen of the life Lucas was living, and the grandchildren he was refusing to claim. The carefully constructed wall of financial detachment Harold had built around his heart finally began to fissure. The short, simple video clip of Naomi's modest surroundings played on a silent loop inside Harold Sterling's mind. It wasn't the high-definition quality or the exotic subject matter that held him captive. It was the authenticity. The life he saw was stripped of the artifice he was so accustomed to, raw and vital. The gentle humming on the soundtrack, the sound of Amy, the woman he had dismissed as a peasant and gold digger, was the sound of profound, unconditional care. For the first time in decades, the impenetrable armor of his financial ruthlessness felt a sharp, penetrating crack. He had always envisioned his grandchildren as miniature Sterlings, dressed in bespoke outfits, learning Mandarin by age 3, and destined for the same cold, brilliant life he had built. He had expected Lucas to fail miserably, to crawl back, defeated by debt and discomfort, proving Harold's cynical worldview correct. But the video showed something entirely different. Resilience. It showed a life of intense labor, yes, but also a life brimming with emotional wealth, a wealth Harold had never valued or possessed. Harold dismissed Richard, telling him simply, "Get out. And fix this SGI mess, Richard. I need to think." He spent the rest of the day sequestered, canceling all meetings, a completely unprecedented move that sent further tremors of panic through Sterling Global Investments. He stared out the penthouse window, not seeing the glittering expanse of the city he owned, but the faint, ghostly image of his granddaughter in her worn wooden swing. His obsession with the Cassandra Group suddenly faded into the background, replaced by a devastating personal guilt. He realized the vast majority of his energy and fortune over the last 6 years had been spent not on building, but on destruction, on systematically trying to erase the single source of genuine happiness his son had ever found. He had disowned Lucas for love, and in doing so, he had impoverished his own heart. He was a father and grandfather, yet he was utterly alone, surrounded by yes-men and the echo of his own wealth. Harold's epiphany was not a sudden, complete conversion, but a slow, agonizing realization of error. He wasn't suddenly humble, but he was undeniably shaken. He ordered his private security team to immediately cease all surveillance of Lucas and Amy. He also, with a heavy, trembling hand, pulled the final litigation papers regarding the custody battle off the desk of his lead counsel, shredding them in a private machine. Cancel the Sterling versus Lucas case. Inform the judge and the opposition that the matter is concluded, he commanded the stunned lawyer. When the lawyer asked why, Harold simply replied, "Because I said so." Focus on the Ethelred fallout. The cessation of the custody threat was the first, tangible result of Lucas's combined strategy. On the farm, Lucas noticed the abrupt silence. The small, local lawyer who had been defending them pro bono suddenly called, relieved. "Lucas, I don't know what you did, but the entire Sterling legal machine just folded. They dropped the custody threats, the bankruptcy threats, everything. You're clear." A wave of profound relief washed over Lucas and Amy. They held each other, their twins sleeping soundly between them, knowing the immediate existential threat was gone. The corporate ghost strike had forced Harold to divert his resources, and Richard's quiet intervention had delivered the emotional blow that finally halted the attack. "He stopped," Amy whispered, tears of exhaustion and joy streaming down her face. "He actually stopped." "He realized the fight was costing him too much, Amy," Lucas murmured, but even he knew that Richard's visit, and whatever he showed Harold, must have been the deciding factor. He had aimed at the Empire's wallet, but Richard had targeted Harold's soul. However, the war wasn't over. The financial damage Lucas had inflicted on SGI was real and substantial. Lucas knew that the market chaos, which had saved them from the lawsuit, would eventually bring Harold to the precipice of ruin if left unchecked. Despite his father's cruelty, Lucas could not stomach the idea of completely destroying the empire his family had built, especially since Harold was finally showing a flicker of humanity. If SGI failed, the shockwaves would hurt thousands of innocent employees and investors. Lucas needed to transition from saboteur to savior, to complete the redemption arc for his family, but he couldn't do it anonymously. He had to face his father, not as a defiant son, but as the man who held the keys to his financial survival. He had to demand a final, clear settlement, his family's safety and respect, in exchange for the solution to the Ethelred debt crisis. He spent the next few days preparing, not financial models, but a personal appeal. He crafted a detailed, secure message, this time signed not as the Cassandra Group, but as Lucas Sterling, and sent it to Richard Sterling's private email. The message was direct. Richard, I know it was you who finally broke through to him. Thank you. He has stopped the legal attacks, which is what I needed. But the market chaos is real. The Ethelred position is still dangerously overleveraged. I created the crisis, and I know the exact complex maneuvers required to stabilize the position and save SGI from bankruptcy. I need a meeting with Harold, in person, alone, within 48 hours. The location must be neutral. No security, no lawyers, no threats. I will come with the solution to the Ethelred problem. My price is not money, but acceptance and respect for my wife and children. If he accepts, the crisis ends. If he refuses, the solution goes public, and SGI collapses. This is the only way forward. Tell him, Uncle Richard. Lucas. Richard received the email and, knowing the sheer gravity of Lucas's claim, and the absolute necessity of the solution, immediately brought it to Harold. He found his older brother subdued, staring at the cityscape, seemingly lost in thought. Harold read the email. He saw the cold, brilliant calculation of the financial threat, but also the firm, emotional conviction of the demand for acceptance. Lucas was offering salvation from the ruin he himself had engineered. It was the ultimate power move, a move Harold could only respect, even while it infuriated him. He wants to trade the end of SGI's collapse for the simple recognition of that farm girl and my grandchildren, Harold murmured, a bitter irony lacing his voice. He wants the truth, Harold. He wants you to admit he chose the right life, Richard said softly. The market can be fixed. Your soul, if you lose him now, cannot. You have 24 hours before the market opens and the hemorrhage begins again. What is your answer? Harold closed his eyes, the image of his tiny granddaughter in her modest swing flashing behind his eyelids. He was a multi-billionaire, but Lucas, the man he had disowned, was now the only one who could save him. Not just his empire, but perhaps the last vestiges of his dignity. Tell him yes, Richard, Harold finally conceded, his voice raspy with defeat and reluctant admiration. Tell him I accept his terms. The location will be the old boathouse on the lake, tomorrow afternoon. And Richard, keep this to yourself. No one is to know I am meeting him. No one. The stage was set for the final, high-stakes negotiation. Lucas, the disowned farmer, was about to walk back into his father's world, armed only with spreadsheets and the fierce, unyielding love for his family. He was preparing to force a financial titan to trade his pride for his empire. The old boathouse stood on the edge of the vast private lake behind Sterling Manor, a structure Harold rarely used. Its peeling paint and dusty interior offered the perfect neutral, isolated ground. It was a place where wealth was forgotten, replaced by the quiet sounds of lapping water and rustling reeds. Lucas arrived alone, driving the same modest truck that had carried Amy to the hospital. He wore clean, simple clothes, sturdy work boots, jeans, and a durable jacket, the uniform of his chosen life. He carried a battered messenger bag containing his laptop and the meticulously detailed financial blueprint that represented both the crisis and the cure for the Sterling Empire. He was no longer the defiant boy. He was a man walking into a negotiation with a titan, armed with absolute leverage. Harold Sterling was waiting inside. He was dressed in a simple cashmere sweater and slacks, looking smaller and older than Lucas remembered. He sat on an overturned wooden crate, not behind a power desk, and the usual imperious glint in his eyes was replaced by a weary, profound defeat. He didn't offer a greeting, only a curt nod toward a second crate. Sit, Lucas, Harold commanded, his voice devoid of its usual roar, hollowed out by the corporate panic he was struggling to contain. Lucas did not rush. He walked across the dusty floor, set his bag down, and sat directly opposite his father, close enough that they had no choice but to face the full weight of their fractured relationship. You risked everything, Harold stated, breaking the suffocating silence. The Cassandra Group. You were that smart, vicious little ghost that almost crippled SGI. I spent $5 billion in the last week trying to fix what you broke. Why, Lucas? Why destroy your own family's legacy? Because you forced me to, father, Lucas retorted, his voice calm but unwavering. You gave me an ultimatum. My children's safety and their mother's honor, or your empire. You forced me to choose between survival and ruin. I had to create a distraction so big you couldn't focus on destroying my family. I had to prove that the peasant woman's son was a bigger financial threat than any of your rivals." Harold winced visibly at the phrase peasant woman, the guilt of Richard's video clip still heavy on him. "I saw the video, Lucas. Richard showed me. The baby. She's beautiful. And the house. It's not what I expected. I thought you would be starving, begging by now. We are poor, father, but we are not starving. We are happy. And we are safe, now that you've backed off the legal attacks. That life, the life you call disgraceful, is the most honorable, honest life I have ever known. Amy built it with hard work and compassion. Something the Sterling Empire knows nothing about," Lucas pressed, refusing to soften the edges of the truth. Harold finally met his son's eyes, a genuine expression of pain crossing his face. "I made a mistake. I let my fear of losing control blind me to your happiness. I was wrong about Amy. I was wrong to try and buy you back. I was wrong to disown you." He paused, the admission tasting like ash in his mouth. It was the closest Harold Sterling had ever come to an apology. "But I need that solution, Lucas. This Ethelred debt is going to sink us all. I need you to tell me how to fix it." Lucas opened his messenger bag and pulled out his laptop, placing it on the crate between them. "I have the solution right here. A complex series of debt swaps and a quiet, rapid divestiture of the overvalued assets. It stabilizes SGI, saves the remaining billions, and more importantly, saves the thousands of jobs you jeopardize with your greed." He looked up, his expression hard. "But I told you my price. It is not money. It is acceptance." He leaned forward, laying out the terms with the clarity of a professional negotiator. "First, you will sign a document acknowledging Amy as my wife and the mother of your grandchildren, Elijah and Naomi, and you will agree never to interfere in our lives again, legally or financially. Second, you will immediately cease all covert activities aimed at destroying our ability to earn a living, guaranteeing we can build our farm business without your sabotage. Third, you will publicly, at a time of our choosing, acknowledge the existence of your grandchildren, validating them not as sterling assets, but as members of the family born of my choice." Lucas pushed a simple, printed document across the crate, a brief, legally sound affirmation of non-interference and acceptance. "Sign this, and the solution to SGI's crisis is yours. Refuse, and the full, unredacted Cassandra Group report, including the final death blow to Ethelred's remaining valuation, goes live tomorrow morning." Harold stared at the document, then at the laptop screen glowing with the salvation he desperately needed. The sheer audacity of his son, using the very business skills Harold had paid millions to instill in him, turning them into a weapon for love, was breathtaking. He had demanded an empire for acceptance. Harold reached out, not for the pen, but for the laptop. Lucas watched as his father's eyes, the cold, calculating eyes he knew so well, swept over the complex, elegant solution Lucas had engineered. He saw the sheer brilliance of the analysis, the understanding that only a true financial genius could possess. He realized that Lucas was not only capable of running the Sterling Empire but was perhaps the only person capable of saving it from Harold's own hubris. He sighed, a deep, rattling sound of total surrender. He pushed the laptop back toward Lucas and picked up the pen. "You win, Lucas," Harold admitted, the words barely a whisper. He signed the document with a firm hand. The contract was sealed, not by lawyers, but by necessity and a thread of rediscovered familial devotion. Lucas felt a surge of triumph, quickly tempered by a deep sense of closure. He immediately connected the laptop to the boathouse's weak Wi-Fi and transferred the complete, detailed strategy to Harold's encrypted drive. "The solution is now yours, father. You have 72 hours to execute the trades and disclosures to stabilize the position. SGI will survive." Harold nodded, watching the screen. After the transfer was complete, he looked up at his son, his expression complex. "You could have bankrupted me, Lucas. You could have walked away with billions in ransom. Why didn't you?" "Because I didn't want your money, father. I wanted my life, and I needed you to understand the value of it," Lucas said simply, standing up and zipping his messenger bag. I needed you to see that my choice, my family, was worth more than your empire. And that sometimes the greatest wealth is not what you own, but who you love. Harold remained seated, looking smaller than ever. Will you come back, Lucas? Not to the company, but to the house? Will you let me see them? Lucas paused at the door, considering the request. Not yet. You need to prove the acceptance in that paper is real, Father. You need to be ready to accept Amy and the twins into a world you never wanted for them. When that time comes, we will let you know. Until then, focus on SGI. I have a family to get back to. Lucas walked out of the boathouse and back toward his truck, leaving Harold Sterling, the financial titan, alone with the ghosts of his empire and the dawning realization of his profound 6-year-long mistake. Harold held the signed document, the paper feeling lighter than any contract he had ever held, yet signifying the most expensive and most necessary bargain of his life. He stared at the spot where Lucas had been, the quiet finality of the confrontation settling around him. He had paid the highest price, his pride, but in return he had saved his legacy and potentially opened the door to his lost son and unknown grandchildren. The true journey of redemption was just beginning. The stabilization of Sterling Global Investments was a masterclass in financial maneuvering, orchestrated by Harold Sterling but executed using Lucas's precise blueprint. The market, initially wary, quickly recognized the surgical brilliance of the debt swaps and asset divestitures. SGI survived, emerging leaner, more focused, and ironically, more secure than it had been under Harold's previously reckless expansion. The crisis, though costly, had purged the corporation of its weakest elements. Harold, who had spent the entire 72-hour execution period locked in his office, emerging only to issue commands, felt a deep, unfamiliar exhaustion that wasn't purely physical. He had saved his empire, but the victory tasted sterile. He held the signed document, the contract to accept his family, and realized that the true challenge wasn't fixing SGI, it was fixing his own broken heart. He spent the next few weeks observing the terms of the agreement. He made no threats, ordered no surveillance, and most difficult of all, he maintained absolute silence. He was waiting, enduring the hardest test of all, patience and proof of sincerity. On the farm, life slowly returned to a sustainable rhythm. Lucas's successful corporate strike had bought them permanent peace from harassment. The farm stand stabilized, and Lucas, no longer needing to consult secretly to survive, focused entirely on developing their agricultural business and his family. The twins, Elijah and Naomi, were now 6 months old, rolling over, beginning to babble, and radiating an innocent joy that filled the small farmhouse. The threat of the Sterling Empire was now a distant memory, replaced by the reality of a flourishing, loving family. One crisp autumn morning, a month after the boathouse meeting, Amy was gathering the last of the late-season vegetables while Lucas watched the twins sleeping in their travel crib on the porch. He found himself thinking, not with resentment, but with a strange, contemplative peace about his father. Harold had proven his word. It was time for the final step. Lucas pulled out the simple burner phone Richard had given him for emergencies and sent a single text message. It's time. Saturday, 2 p.m. Just you. No fanfare. The response came back instantly. Understood. H. The meeting place was the farm. Lucas and Amy agreed that the visit had to be on their terms, on their turf, allowing Harold to step fully into their world. Amy, despite her lingering reservations about the man who had called her a peasant, agreed. He needs to see what he almost destroyed, Lucas. He needs to see the love that makes this work. Saturday arrived, clear and cool. Lucas and Amy dressed the twins in simple, soft outfits, holding them close, ready for the introduction. Exactly at 2 p.m., a modest black sedan, not the sleek SUV, but a quiet, almost anonymous town car, pulled up the dirt drive. Out stepped Harold Sterling. He was alone. Harold looked utterly out of place, his expensive coat and polished shoes incongruous against the backdrop of mud and falling leaves. He stopped at the edge of the yard, his hands clasped tightly behind his back, looking like a lost statue. He wasn't arrogant. He looked genuinely nervous, vulnerable in a way Lucas had never seen. Lucas walked toward him, leaving Amy on the porch with the babies. This had to be done man-to-man first. Father, Lucas greeted him, the word feeling oddly heavy after 6 years of silence. Lucas, Harold returned, his voice rough. He looked around the farm, taking in the old truck, the bustling chicken coop, the worn porch swing. This is different. This is our home, Father, Lucas stated, allowing a faint smile. I chose it over everything else you offered. I know, Harold said quietly, his eyes focused on the porch. I came to keep my word, to see them, and to try, if you'll let me, to begin to make amends for the monstrous fool I've been. Lucas led him to the porch. Amy stood, cradling Naomi, while Elijah was perched on her hip. Amy's posture was protective and reserved, her dark eyes clear and uncompromising. Amy, this is Harold. Harold, this is my wife, Amy, and your grandchildren, Naomi and Elijah. Lucas introduced them simply. Harold's gaze didn't linger on Amy. It fixed immediately on the 2 children. He had seen the video, but seeing them in the flesh, the twins, the visible, living embodiment of the life he had tried to crush, stopped him in his tracks. They were tiny, perfect, and utterly oblivious to the drama that surrounded their birth. Amy gently shifted Naomi into the curve of her arm, extending her toward him. Naomi is wide awake. Elijah is usually more curious, she said, her voice neutral, offering the opportunity but demanding respect. Harold approached slowly, tentatively, like a man afraid of shattering something fragile. He reached out a trembling hand, not to touch, but just to hover near Naomi's tiny, soft cheek. He looked deep into her dark, shining eyes, Amy's eyes, full of honest warmth. In that moment, Harold Sterling didn't see an inheritance, or a business asset, or a reflection of his own power. He saw pure, vulnerable humanity. Then Elijah, the curious one, reached out a small, chubby hand and grabbed Harold's index finger. The grip was surprisingly strong, an innocent, firm tether. This was the sight. The tiny, unexpected, and completely guileless connection. Harold Sterling, the man who moved mountains of money, whose finger had pointed and destroyed, was suddenly caught and held fast by the 5 tiny fingers of his grandson, a connection forged by blood and secured by love. A massive, silent dam broke within Harold. His face crumpled and tears he hadn't shed since childhood, streamed down his weathered cheeks, wetting the hand Elijah was holding. My grandson, he choked out, the words raw with emotion. I am so sorry, Lucas. Amy. I am so terribly sorry for everything I said, everything I did. He didn't beg for forgiveness. He simply acknowledged the profound weight of his error. He looked at Amy, whose reserve was finally beginning to soften under the weight of his genuine grief. Over the next few hours, Harold stayed. He sat on the porch swing, rocking gently, holding Elijah while Lucas held Naomi. He talked, not about SGI or money, but about the simple history of the land, about Lucas's childhood, about the things he regretted. He truly listened to Amy talk about her life, her family, and the challenges of the farm. He finally saw them. Before he left, Harold presented Lucas with 2 small, locked wooden boxes. These are not cash, Lucas. They are college funds. Fully vested and secure, outside of SGI's reach. They are not a bribe. They are a grandfather's commitment. Acceptance means being responsible for the family you want to be a part of. And I want to be a part of this. Lucas accepted the boxes. It was not a return to the Sterling fortune. It was a respectful gift, a promise of security, earned through hardship and sacrifice. Harold hugged Lucas tightly, a fierce, genuine embrace, the kind Lucas had longed for his entire life. He shook Amy's hand, looking her directly in the eye, the respect now clear and undeniable. Thank you, Amy. Thank you for making my son the man he was always meant to be. As Harold's car pulled away, leaving the yard quiet once more, Lucas watched it go, feeling a deep, quiet sense of victory. He hadn't just won a financial battle. He had won back his father, purified by the fire of their conflict. Lucas and Amy sat back on the porch swing, the twins sleeping soundly against their chests. They had lost a fortune but gained a family, proving that the true legacy was not built on billions, but on the courage to choose love over money. Lucas had been disowned, but in the end, by fighting for the life Harold had scorned, he had shown his father the greatest wealth of all. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.